Hey everybody, and happy Mother's Day. That's right, it is Mother's Day today, even though it's probably going to be a strange one, or at least it's Mother's Day when I'll be uploading this. But it probably is going to be a strange one. I know that some people probably won't be able to visit their mothers today with everything going on. For those of you who can visit your mothers, or make sure to tell her Happy Mother's Day and how much you appreciate her. For those of you who can't, make sure to let her know however you can, or whoever would be your mother, whoever raised you. But happy Mother's Day to all of our mothers that are out there and in this church. Usually we would take the time to recognize each of you, but unfortunately times are odd, and so we can't really do that. But still, happy Mother's Day to all of you, and happy Mother's Day to my mom, who I know will probably be watching this eventually. Now, I unfortunately did not pick out a Mother's Day passage for today. I had something else on my heart, but I might talk about my mom during some of this, because it is Mother's Day. Normally I would tell some probably embarrassing story about her, but since she'll be watching this, don't worry, Mom, I'll try to avoid any embarrassing stories about you. I don't think I have any in here. But in other news, restrictions are starting to loosen in our area, and we have been kind of watching about different things and talking about them. There are some questions of if it is too early to start reopening everything. There are several states that say yes it is. Here in Alabama, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It could go either way, it seems like. But it does seem like we could start to gather together again. We will definitely need to take some precautions in all of this. We'll have to spread ourselves out throughout the sanctuary, wear masks, gloves if you have them, though I guess the gloves people go back and forth on, but we would make sure to want to spread out, keep so much distance between us, have a mask, but we are looking possibly, depending on how things go between now and then, but we are planning on penciling in Sunday the 24th, the day before Memorial Day, to gather together once again and to be here together as a church family. Now, at least for now, we would just do the Sunday morning service at 11 o'clock. We're not planning on having Sunday school or anything else. And of course, as difficult as it will be for our church, no shaking hands or hugging or any of that. I know we'll all be thrilled to see each other once again, but we will have to manage to resist from being social and having that welcome time. I might try to have welcome time just out of sheer habit, but we'll need to avoid that for the sake of caution and prudence. We as a church do focus on spiritual health, but physical health is still very important. And of course, we want to make sure if for whatever reason it sneaks in here, the virus sneaks in here, that we don't spread it, and we definitely don't carry it out to anyone else. We want to make sure that we're not doing any harm unintentionally. But it is something that we will watch, plan on doing that tentatively. And of course, for any of our church members that are at risk, or just anyone else, if you don't feel comfortable gathering together again yet, that is totally understandable. We are going to try to hopefully find some way to still include sending out video or message to all of you during that, if you do want to stay at home, so that you can have that option. So maybe we can do either one, gathering together, or continue on like this if you don't want to meet together again. That is understandable. But yes, the 24th, we're looking to gather together once again in God's house. But today, our scripture is going to be Daniel chapter 3. I actually did try to narrow it down and to not really look at the entire chapter, because it's a long chapter and has a little bit of repetition for a reason, but it does have that repetition. But as I thought about it, you can't really cut it down, because we are looking at the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It is a well-known story in the book of Daniel. If you don't know the story, you probably know the VeggieTales version. They did a wonderful adaptation of it. But it is a pretty well-known story, and I did want to look at the whole chapter today for our study. So bear with me, but we will read this together. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace." Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall be immediately cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own. Therefore I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So, like I said, this chapter is the famous, well-known story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It is, of course, one of my favorite stories in Daniel. VeggieTales did a great version of that, telling of that in the VeggieTales series. And of course, it's one of those Bible stories that we grow up with. You probably have heard the story, though honestly, whenever you read it or see it or hear it, you probably hear some of the abridged version where they skip over a lot of the repetition that goes on in this passage. You do have a lot of repetition, but that was kind of the way of providing a lot of emphasis. It's emphasizing what Nebuchadnezzar's order is. It is emphasizing the faith of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It is a lot of things that are going on here that are being repeated over and over and over again as you read through it. But it is the story of how Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood up to the king Nebuchadnezzar against him and against his unjust declaration. King Nebuchadnezzar has, of course, ordered everyone in his kingdom, regardless of their faith or their culture or where they came from, that anytime they hear music, they are to bow down to the golden idol and worship it. This is, of course, kind of a strange law, and it's ordered and agreed with and upon by all of his servants and officials of every station. We're getting the full list of station, the full list of any kind of instrument, which still ends with and any other instruments or types of music. You are to bow down to this golden statue. And of course, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, being men of faith, they refuse. Now, last week we looked at chapter 1 of Daniel, and we saw how Daniel and his 3 friends were brought into the kingdom of Babylon. They were brought into the empire of Babylon during the time of the exile of Israel. And of course, Babylon, being an empire, was one that had conquered many peoples and nations across their area in that ancient Near East area. They had conquered many peoples, and typically their way of conquering and subjugating a people was to take them from their home and plant them somewhere else in the empire. That way they were out of sorts and had to adjust to new cultures and new things. It was a way to try to assimilate them. And in last week, we saw that he takes the best of the young men, the potential future leaders of Israel and Jerusalem, and he trains them to be Babylonians, Chaldeans. Daniel, of course, leads these 3 in their own way of staying faithful. And these 3 men are eventually promoted when Daniel is recognized, and they are given great prominence over different affairs, and people become jealous of that. And so they do decide to take advantage of that, but don't get anything wrong. The idea to enact this law to make the people bow down and worship the golden image, the golden idol, that is completely and utterly Nebuchadnezzar's idea as the emperor and as the king. And everyone pretty much supports and says, yep, that's a great idea, we'll go along with it. Though they do take advantage of this chance to try to bring down these 3 Jewish men who are still staying faithful to God. But of course, we see, very importantly, that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do not fear anything that is going on here. They do not fear Nebuchadnezzar. They do not fear the scheming. They do not fear the law. They just simply refuse to bow down and worship something other than their God. And they trust that whatever happens, God will carry them through. In this passage especially, I love their response to Nebuchadnezzar. He says to them, if you do not do this, what God could possibly save you? And they simply respond, there's no need to answer you, because if it is so, basically if God wills it, God can easily rescue us from you. But if he doesn't, it doesn't matter. We will still choose to worship God and God alone and no other gods. They, of course, say it a little differently than that. But that is the core of what they're saying. They don't care that they're facing a hard time, that they could just simply bow down and survive this ordeal. they choose to place faith first. And it is important in our life. The most important thing is to have faith in God. And the most importantly, to have faith that it will all work out according to his will. In all things, we must have faith that God will carry us through. And so we do have a time of crisis. Now, this law that Nebuchadnezzar passes is presented as an unjust, unfair law. It is one that goes strictly against the worship of God. Now, I think I mentioned this a little bit last week, but it is something that typically in wartime, in war during these times, people viewed it as gods fighting against gods. If your country lost the battle, it was because your gods were weaker than the other country's gods. Israel, though, understood it didn't work like that. They understood that they served the one God, the Most High God, the creator of all things. If we lose, it's because he wasn't on our side during that fight. He allowed us to lose. And they had it predicted throughout their history that this would happen if they continued to turn away from him. And so they are conquered. And so they face this time of crisis in the exile. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego see this law be put up. Nebuchadnezzar issues it. He gives it a harsh punishment. And they say, no, we cannot follow that. And so Nebuchadnezzar calls them in and gives them the ultimatum of either bow down or I will throw you in the furnace. But this is an unjust law. And I think we can all understand that when a law is wrong, when a law goes against our beliefs, we should stand up against it. I think we can all understand that to some extent. It does kind of become a question, though, of which laws to follow, because we do have a calling as Christians, as long as it doesn't interfere with our faith, to follow the laws that are set up by the country and by our people around us. We follow them and strive to be good citizens. But for Daniel and his friends, they are in the Babylonians and they are held by them and they follow their laws. We see that, more often than not, they do follow the laws of the Babylonians. They're viewed as perfectly fine, very good Babylonians and Persians. When Cyrus comes along and conquers Babylonia and Persia takes over, Daniel is still serving that emperor and helping his people as best they can. But they are seen as good Babylonians. They're being promoted. They're doing well. And they follow the laws unless they conflict with the faith in their God. And that is, of course, what we all have. And right now, we live in interesting times. Well, sometimes it just feels like it's really boring. It just kind of drags on. But everything is kind of crazy. And because it's so crazy, we were sometimes forced to just stay at home all day. It's a weird time. But we're seeing lots of restrictions and stay-at-home orders. And we're seeing some people who are following this and others who aren't. And it may feel like we're banned from going to church and worship. But, I'm not preaching on this because I see these as parallels and we should be rising up against the restrictions. No, I'm not saying that at all. In fact, they are a totally different situation. We're not banned from worship. We're not banned from faith. We're not being told to bow down to a golden image. The restrictions of gathering together are for the sake of health, and physical health is important. As much as sometimes we like to ignore that, it is still important. And we don't want to cause harm as Christians. So that is why we should strive to be cautious during this time and staying at home for now, but we still very much can stay faithful. It can be a crisis of faith that forces us to stay at home, which is more that it can be a crisis of faith while we stay at home and don't see each other. We miss out on that accountability. That's more why I wanted to focus on this today, that crisis of faith that we may face. We may face a moment like that feels like this, but it's not the same as having to rebel and rise up against some unjust law. But, we don't quite see that right now with the restrictions. In fact, it seems like they're trying to get us back to normal as quickly and safely as possible. They're not trying to stop us from having worship. Some are arguing that may be a bit too soon, but that's kind of the whole thing, not to get into it. Basically, I'm saying, much as it may feel like this isn't the laws or time to rebel against. We should still be trying to stay as safe as possible. What Nebuchadnezzar orders is different. He orders that everyone worship the image of gold set up, which for some reason we always seem to assume is an image of himself. So that's kind of what I think of. I don't think it actually was, but that's what I always see. Set up an image of himself in gold and have everyone bow down and worship him as the emperor every time that music is played. It doesn't matter what instruments, whenever you hear music, you should bow down and worship. I mean, we wouldn't see anything like this today, but well, hopefully not. But it would be kind of like if Congress and the government declared, they sent us all a picture of President Trump and just said anytime you walk by that you have to hang up that picture in your living room. Anytime you walk by, you're supposed to kneel down and offer prayers of thanks and adoration every time you walk into the room, when you get up, and you go to get coffee. Of course, that would be ridiculous and something that I think we would all stand up against. But it's not always as overt as this example is. It's easy to think about the laws being the issue here. It's easy to think that it's the laws that it's saying, oh yeah, we should stand up to these laws that are stopping us from faith. And yes, when there are laws that inhibit our faith, we do stand up to that. But it is more. This is a passage about idols in our life that prevent us from keeping faith. Sometimes it is something very overt and in our face that is trying to pull us away from God and faith and telling us to worship anything else. But sometimes it's more subtle. This is a warning against our idols, a warning against things that we place above God. And we have those today. Everyone has them. There may not be laws passed declaring that we must worship these idols or be punished by law. Sometimes it's more just social peer pressure that we feel that tells us you should, have this or look at this or do this, or else you'll be ostracized and cast aside. It would be social suicide to disregard this for the sake of faith. This can be different things. I'm sure we all have something. Maybe it's TV, a hobby, a brand, money, a car, food, a computer, yourself. There's something that at times has gotten in the way of you spending time with God because you made it more important than God. There's something that when all of this is finally truly cleared up, you'll probably have that time where you're happy, you're free, and going out about, things are getting back to normal, and you'll come to church, and you'll be more faithful, and you'll enjoy spending that time with your church and having that happy together time with God. And so you'll find yourself going to church. But eventually you'll have that thing that'll try to pull you back. And it'll make you say, do I really have to go to church every week? And I'm telling you now, the answer is yes, you do need to go to church every week. I know some weeks you can't make it. That happens. Life gets in the way. Things do come up. But when you can make it to church, you should come to church. You may have something that says, maybe I should do this today. Maybe I should do that. Maybe I don't need to have quiet time today. Maybe I don't need to pray to God today because I'm spending it doing whatever. I'm going to spend it watching TV. I'm going to spend it just resting. I'm going to spend it taking care of myself. Whatever it may be. Sometimes it does come in the form of a law, and we must rebel against that. But these days, you don't quite see that as much. Sometimes it's more just who we are as a people. It's the people we surround ourselves with, the friends outside of church, the culture. We look at it and we see some kind of pressure to do this, to follow that, whatever it may be. There is something that calls us to put it above God. And that's what Nebuchadnezzar does here. He places himself above God. He places this idol, he places his own gods above all other gods, including the one and only God, and says, you must worship or face death. He threatens safety and well-being if if you deny that. Maybe what we have that we look for is something that offers entertainment. Maybe it offers security. Maybe it feels like it offers safety, and that seems good. And it may even seem good and perfectly reasonable. Sometimes it's not the obvious threat of death or going against your faith. Sometimes it's a little bit less obvious than that, but it does exist. We can all think of something. And so we have to stay vigilant at all times. We see Christ call for that all throughout the Gospels, calling for us to stay watchful, to stay vigilant of both ourselves and others and each other. Stay vigilant, to stay watchful, to stay on the look, to look for those moments, to make sure we keep faith in those moments, to remember the times for faith, to be on watch that those things, those idols, those whatever pressures they may be, that they don't catch us unawares, that we don't find ourselves thinking, yeah, this is perfectly fine for me to skip spending time with God, to do this, to do that, whatever. Now, as I study Daniel, at its heart, Daniel is a book of rebellion. It is a book of rebelling against the Babylonian and eventually Persian Empire and staying, but doing so in a manner of faith. It is an aspect of while they are living conquered by an alien empire, another empire, the Babylonian Empire, that is demanding that they bow down to other gods, Daniel and his friends refuse. They rebel and stay faithful to God. But we see there is an aspect of quiet rebellion. They do follow some of the laws. They present themselves as good Babylonians. Last week we looked at the battle of the food in chapter 1. You kind of see where some of the things that he says, he takes them into his courthouse. The king Nebuchadnezzar takes them into his own palace. He teaches them, he clothes them, he gives them all these things. They go with that, but then when it comes to the food, they refuse to follow the food. They fight against that. But they do so in a way where the king probably never really finds out that they did that. But it is a book of faithful rebellion. Certain things they fall in line with and don't fight against. Certain things they make sure to fight against. Today's is an obvious situation to fight against, but it's not always. And there's also the question, they could have pretended to kneel. They could have pretended to kneel, pretended to offer those prayers, while in their hearts they were simply praying to God. And then, of course, the whole food thing they kept out of the sight of the king. As far as we know, the king still believes they're eating the food that he sent to them, when in reality their servants are just bringing them vegetables, because it turns out vegetables are better for you, as much as we don't like to admit it sometimes. But why not just keep the king ignorant here as well? Why the difference? Why the difference in how they stand up? Why the difference in the things they do fight against and things they don't? Basically, I always find myself asking the question, when do we rebel and when do we don't? Wait, that didn't make any sense. When do we rebel and when do we not rebel? What are the things that we stand up against? What are the things that we say, this is fine? And I always thought it was a matter of discernment and watching it and examining each thing and staying watchful, coming up to it, but then it's such a matter of interpretation. But as you study this chapter especially, you realize that's a moot question. It's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are really saying in their answer to the king. It doesn't matter. What matters is faith. The only thing that matters is faith. The only thing that matters is staying faithful to God. For Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, bowing down and worshiping, even pretending to bow down and worship, would have been a loss for their faith. It would have been detrimental to their faith. When we face those times of crisis, and when we face those times where it seems like we may be being prevented or something may be stopping that, whether that is from the government or legal, which It's not really or societal or whatever. When do we stand up to it and when do we not? Doesn't matter. Just focus on staying faithful in those times. Strive to do whatever is necessary to stay faithful. And honestly, that differs for people. Some can stay perfectly faithful with modern conveniences, and some can't. Some need to give up certain parts of their life for the sake of faith. To my church members and to most people who know me, I have admitted on occasion that I love video games. And I know not all people like video games, and I understand why. There's a bunch of problems with that. There's lots of things going on with video games in the world and the argument, but forgetting all that, I like video games. I love them. They're a good pastime, they are fun, they are a good hobby, and I used to play them a lot more than I do. I don't play them quite nearly as much as I used to because I've got responsibilities now. I work another job as well as here at the church, and right now we're in lockdown, and so it seems like I should have way more time to play video games, and I really thought I would, but honestly, I still work my other job full time. I'm still recording my sermons and sending out Wednesday lessons. I really don't have as much time to play video games as I would like to, and honestly, as much as I used to. I could still play video games. I could still put them ahead of a lot of things. I could find that time to play them, but I would be losing out on all my other responsibilities. They would be detracting away from things. Yes, I feel like I can still play video games and maintain my faith without it affecting different parts of me, but at the same time, sometimes I have to be careful with things like video games because it's too easy for me to say, yeah, instead of having a quiet time, I'm going to spend 30 minutes playing video games. Because this is the only time during the day that I've had free time. That free time should be the time I spend with God, but instead, I might spend it playing video games. And it is things like that. You have these hobbies, you have these things that you may have in your life that you don't want to give up, but they may suddenly be getting in the way of your faith. But apparently I'm saying in the sermon that I'm giving up video games, and I'm probably not doing that. I do cut back on them as much as possible for the sake of my responsibilities. And faith is a responsibility of ours. We do have a responsibility to stay faithful. And sometimes we do need to give up things we love because it gets in the way of our faith. Our faith is first and foremost above all things. Staying faithful should be your number one priority. And it's all about making that faith your number one priority. We should take time to look at our life, to examine the things around us and say, are these detracting from my faith? Should I cut back on these, or on this, or that, this hobby? Should I cut back on how much TV I watch? Should I cut back on books? Oh man, that's probably not something I should be doing, recommending you to read less. No, read more, just read your Bible more. But look at those and ask those, and they can be tough questions. But right now, these are strange and difficult times. I don't know how much we've maintained our faith throughout a lot of this not being able to come together, how much we've let other things creep in and take our mindset from us. There may be some pressure for different things, but we should focus, whether we are gathering back together again, or if we continue on with how we are, whatever comes, whatever happens, whatever crisis we may face next, the only thing we should focus on, the only thing we should worry about is staying faithful to God. And we should know and remember always that coming salvation. Well, actually, that salvation is already here, but we know that salvation, that glory, God coming into our lives and rescuing us from the world still is coming, yet it has already come and it's still coming every day. It's always a fun thing to think about. But at the end of this story, these three, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, risk their lives for the sake of faith and their God, our God. And they are saved. Their death is prevented. God divinely intervenes in this moment, sending possibly Jesus, someone like a son of God, possibly an angel, to appear in the fire and keep them safe so that not even their hair is singed. Even though the fire was hot enough to kill the men simply standing outside of it, they are perfectly fine inside of it. And so I want to make this big ending declaring that staying faithful will prevent us from facing the worst and most fiery of dangers. No matter what happens, God will pull us out. But sometimes that's not what happens. Martyrs for faith were very much a real thing in the church, in the churches and throughout the church history. And unfortunately, we still see it happen today sometimes around the world. People who go to their deaths because of their faith. We don't always see God intervene in that big divine manner. We can be what we should assure ourselves of, though, is that whatever is happening, it is according to God's will. And of course, what God may or may not do in our lives when we face the crisis, we should remember what we think God does or doesn't do. We should remember it is happening according to his will. And we should remember that what we think, what we see, what we know may happen, whether he magically pulls us out or leaves us in there, it is moot. Because we've already been saved. We've already been forgiven. We already have that salvation that allows us into his kingdom. That forgiveness that we're looking for, that we're working for, is there. We should keep that faith. And whether we're pulled out or not, it is the faith that matters. It's what they say in the story, that it doesn't matter either way. They will not worship the king's gods or the golden image that has been set up. They will focus on that, and they will remember their God. So now, I said at the beginning that I would probably try to tell one story about my mom. And so I do have one. I don't think it's an embarrassing story for my mom. It is an embarrassing story for me because it's one of me being kind of an idiot. I once rode my bike into a lake. When I was a kid, me and the neighbors would often go riding bikes around the neighborhood. And one day, it's just me and my friend Joe. We go down to the lake which we had a lake in our neighborhood, though really it was more like an oversized pond. It wasn't really a lake you went swimming in at all. But still, we had a lake. We would ride down there a lot and mess around. Usually we just ride around the neighborhood. Some days we'd go down to the lake and mess around. And while we were there that day, I found that there was this really steep hill that went right to the edge of the lake, but usually you could stop well before the lake. It was just kind of a cool little thing. And I guess it had that adrenaline of maybe I'm going to face plant into the lake. But if you stopped just in time, it was fine. You just had to be careful with hitting the brakes. And I remember I did it by accident the first time, and I stopped, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And so I tried it again. I think I did it 3 times. And it was that third time that I just remember going down that hill saying, yeah, this will be the last time, then we'll go home. I go down that hill, I hit the brakes, nothing happens. And I remember I didn't have time to think anything. Just next thing I knew, I was face down in the lake. But I at least had the feeling as soon as those brakes didn't work that, yeah, this was a really bad idea and I shouldn't have done this. But I remember just kind of as I'm going down the hill, I'm suddenly face down in the lake. I'm standing up trying to get to shore. According to Joe, later, I had actually front flipped over the handlebars straight into the lake. My bike had followed me and immediately sunk into the muck. And I remember kind of coming out, and I was a little bit terrified. I was scared. I was in shock, I guess. It was a scary experience. And I kind of sat there for a while, and Joe just says, don't worry, I'll go get your parents. And I'm not really thinking straight, and so I'm worried about what my mom's going to say, and I don't really want him to leave me. So I try to get him to go get my bike out of the lake so I can ride it back, and he refuses, the jerk. I don't understand why he wouldn't go dive into the disgusting lake for his good friend. The one that I was already covered in. Could have easily just gone in and grabbed myself. Yeah, he probably made the right call there. So I had to go back into the lake, pull my bike out, and I rode it home. I am completely uninjured, fortunately. Nothing bad happened. I am scared of how I will be injured when my mom sees me. But anyways, we go to the door, we knock, my mom comes and just kind of looks at me, and I remember her being surprisingly calm. She just kind of is like, oh, what happened? She just kind of says, what happened? I think I mumbled that I fell in the lake. She has me go around to the garage, brings me stuff to dry off, change clothes, goes upstairs, and then sends me upstairs to take a shower. So I kind of got convinced that I wouldn't be in trouble. But no, I was in trouble. That was more kind of I don't think I got punished for it because, flipping headfirst into a lake is terrifying enough. Adding grounding on top of that would just be cruel and unusual. But I did kind of get griped at in the sense of how could you be that big of an idiot to ride your bike into the lake? Of course, my argument was always going into the lake was not what I was trying to do. I was going to stop before I hit the lake because I was in control. But, going into the lake may not have been what I wanted or what I thought would happen, but I was very much tempting my fate on that hill, and I went straight into the lake. And I always remember my mom handled that situation very well. At least I thought so. I like to think that I'll handle similar situations like that. Hopefully I never have to face a situation where if I have kids one day that they are coming back saying they fell into a lake. But I know in that circumstance, my mom forgave me and she was very understanding. But I wasn't really let off the hook necessarily because of that. I actually still have not heard the end of that. In fact, I think they were making fun of me for that about 2 weeks ago. I still haven't heard the end of that, them laughing at me for it. But I do tell that story for a couple of reasons actually here. For one, and kind of the first, what we were talking about earlier with our idols, what often happens, I was fooling myself on this hill. I thought I was in control. I thought I could avoid going into the lake. It was kind of fun. It had that adrenaline rush. It was nice. But I thought, I can stop anytime. I can turn around. I'm in control here. And I didn't realize until it was too late that this was a really bad idea. Sometimes something comes at us, we see something, it pops up in front of us, and it drags us from our faith. We find ourselves thinking we face something. It may not be as literal as the death that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego faced, but we may find ourselves thinking that, okay, like I suggested earlier, maybe if I just bow down and pretend to worship, but instead I actually just offer a worship, a prayer to God instead of to Nebuchadnezzar or to the golden idol, that would be okay. I'll avoid death, I'll avoid punishment, I'll avoid any of that kind of thing, it'll be fine. And we think this is fine. I can stop this, I'm in control, and maybe we do it a few times. But eventually it'll get us. Something that we have that is pulling us away from God, we might think that we have the better of it, but eventually it'll get us. And we should be wary of the things in our lives. We should not let anything get in the way of our faith. We shouldn't let anything get in the way of our faith. Anything stop us. We shouldn't be giving up our control or fooling ourselves. We should be making sure of that. And of course, my mom also, I think, did a great job of not punishing me. The act itself was enough of a punishment. She did come at me with understanding and forgiveness, if a bit of understandably incredulity at how I could do something that ridiculous as to ride into a lake. But She still did kind of give me a lecture and talk to me. I think I had to wash my own bike. I think I wound up convincing my dad to do it, actually. Thanks, Dad. But I still had to take care of some of the things. I still had some of those responsibilities to take care of. When we stand up for something in our faith, when we do rebel against a rule or rebel against faith, sometimes we face that punishment, and we do face that fiery furnace. We'll have to face the music. Hopefully, we're going to it for the right reasons, and not because we did something dumb like I did, but because we stood up for our faith. We're going to that punishment and seeing that. Maybe God will choose to intervene and divinely save us because of our faith. But maybe he won't. Maybe he'll still let us have that punishment. We may not have our lives saved. But we should not think of him, we should not consider him capricious or evil or uncaring for not saving us during that moment. At the end of the day, it is his day. It is his victory. It is our salvation has already been brought in the form of Jesus Christ crucified on the cross. We have been given salvation and forgiveness and love far beyond what we deserve. We choose to live in faith, and we should strive to choose that faith each and every day in the face of everything, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They said it themselves, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." God's will is God's will. There is nothing that we can do to change it. The only thing we can do is choose to stay faithful. Maybe his will is for us to be saved, like the three of them this day, and Daniel, as we will see in the rest of his book. But it's not always, unfortunately. Sometimes we still face that punishment. Sometimes we still face the problems that do come. But it doesn't matter. If he chooses to save us, he can and will save us. But if he doesn't, it doesn't matter, because we chose to be faithful. And we choose to be faithful because he already saved us. He saved us in the only true way that really matters. He brought us into his family, laying down his own life, his son's life, for us. We should not question. We should not find ourselves thinking, why did you not save us in that moment? Why did you not stop my bike before I rode into that lake, God? He already saved me a long time ago. He saved us and brought us in to his kingdom. His will carry out. We carry that faith and live that out. And we strive to face that each and every day. If we have something that's pulling us aside, turning us away from him, we should rebel against it. Whatever pressure may be pushing us towards that, friendships or social or legal or whatever, we should just ignore it and focus wholly and completely on faith, on the salvation that came on the day that Jesus died for each of us, that came when each of us accepted that faith and that grace, the salvation that will come ultimately in glory at the end of time. God has already saved us, so it doesn't matter what happens to us. We are part of his kingdom. Amen. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for for this time to worship and celebrate. I lift up all of our church members and our community around us to keep us safe as these restrictions come loose, to help us to know that whatever happens is your will. Help us to remember that should dark or scary times come, should we face more darkness, should we lose sight that you are there with us always, help us to at least remember that you already saved us. Help us to live that faith that no matter what is happening, that we are focused on you and your kingdom. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.